All right, for more on this, we're joined by education expert Professor Mary Metcalfe. Prof, thank you so very much, as always, for joining us here on SABC News.
Hi, Flo.
Just as a start, I mean, many learners haven't returned to school. The minister very concerned about this, and I wonder where you stand on that. Are you just as concerned? I mean, we're hearing that at least 10% of learners haven't returned to school. And interestingly, earlier this week, I was talking to our Kenya correspondent, and she was saying that there were concerns in Kenya about, some learners perhaps being lost to the system, some of them perhaps even being pregnant, some of the girls perhaps being pregnant, or some trying to perhaps find peace jobs and so forth. I wonder if that's also the case in South Africa, in terms of the fact that is it that we've lost some, in fact, to the system?
Flo, I'm very worried about the potential dropouts arising from this period of COVID lockdown. The minister has said that in the schools she visited, she's seeing dropouts and low attendance of about 10%. But studies are showing that it's even more serious than that. The CRAM study done at the University of Stellenbosch was showing that the average attendance rates are 17 to 20% down, and that vulnerable households are more negatively affected. The DG of Basic Education made a presentation to Parliament in September, which also confirms there's very high levels of. Now, why this is a crisis in South Africa is because we already have dangerous levels of dropout in high schools. And you've pointed to one factor that learners may be able to find low-skilled, low-pay employment outside of the schooling system, which is not going to sustain them through their whole lives. But in fact, the majority are not dropping out into employment. What historically the dropout has been driven by is poor performance in secondary school, where learners gradually give up, and we end up losing 50% of our learners before they even successfully complete the matric. Now, what I'm worried about is that as more learners get out of the habit of attending school, or because they come from vulnerable households where they may have been sent to live with other relatives and they don't necessarily re-enter schools, we may have increased dropout not only at high school, but also at primary school. And this has very negative consequences for the individuals and for the country.
Now, Prof, I mean, I suppose this is really a sort of a big question, and perhaps maybe I'm being unfair to you, but how are we able to sort of recover from this? And I suppose it is the job of the Department of Basic Education to save the situation and to figure out how we get those learners back to school and sort of move on from the issues that we've had in 2020 relating to coronavirus, COVID-19 lockdown and so forth. Is it fair, in fact, to put it on the Department of Basic Education to save the situation? I mean, it's really concerning to me that you're saying even before we had issues of lockdown, we had these problems. We had high dropout to begin with. And this is only making the situation worse. Can it then be saved?
I would say there's things that the Department of Education can do at provincial and national level. There's things that parents need to do, and there's things that communities need to do. Number one, parents need to recognize that however difficult their circumstances, it's in the interests of the family and of the individual for children to return to school. It's in the interest of the community to be able to be vigilant in terms of young learners, young adolescents who are clearly not returning to school, and to remember that it takes a village to raise a child, and that we need to appeal to leaders within the community, such as faith community leaders, to assist those families where learners have dropped out of school. But it's also the responsibility of the department to recognize that learners who have not been attending school have lost significant opportunity to learn. There was a research report that was released this week where researchers from the Department of Basic Education were making predictions of how much learning was lost as a consequence of time being lost. And they were saying that grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, and 10, who have lost as much as 40% of the school year, are going to have lost 50% of learning. Now, what that means is that when learners return to school, we need to make it an environment that is welcoming, that is not putting pressure on the learners in terms of a challenge that is not of their making, that we need to meet the learners where they are in terms of their learning needs, give them a sense of hope and support, and that they don't need to catch up everything this year, that we're going to be with them for the next 2 years, helping them to catch up. The learning environment at school has to be conducive to welcoming back the learners who are at risk of dropout.
And I suppose a question that's really very high up on the minds of many people, and particularly parents who have learners in matric. Are the matriculants fully, equipped for these exams that will be starting then on the 5th of November? And I like the fact that you talk about this pressure. There's added pressure now, given the kind of year that we've had, where, as you mentioned, a lot of learning and schooling has been lost anyway. So you have the fact that matric on its own is a very high pressure grade to begin with, and you're already pressurized by yourself in terms of wanting to pass matric. And let's be realistic, we already have learners who do fail matric anyway in a normal year. What more would the situation then be in a year like the one that we're experiencing currently? Are these matriculants then fully equipped?
Flo, you're completely, who's been through matric, and anyone who's had a learner that they're supporting knows that it's a terribly pressurized year.
Yeah.
The young person feels that their whole life depends on their performance. And one of the risks that we face as a country is that the grade 12 learners of 2020 will feel that they haven't had a fair chance. The DBE research has shown that 17% of the year has been lost in terms of time to the grade 12s, and that the learning loss is as much as 20%. What we need to do is to do everything that we can to help the grade 12s catch up the time that has been lost. The WASA Matrix program is giving broadcast opportunities for learners to focus on using the TV as a mechanism to catch up learning. So WASA Matrix is one way of doing it, but at community level, we need to support schools with a catch-up for the grade 12s. And as families, we need to understand the stress and support them.
All right, Prof, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much for giving us your time, as always.
Thank you, Flo.
All right, that's education expert Professor Mary Metcalfe weighing in really on some of the concerns raised by Minister Angie Motshekga today regarding the fact that at least 10% of learners haven't indeed returned to school. But Prof Metcalfe saying that in fact that percentage might be a lot higher, which is really quite concerning.